the summer of 1991, Sheriff James Tanner of Millbrook County had served in law enforcement for nearly 20 years. At 48, he was respected throughout the rural community, a straight shooter who knew every back road and most of the locals by name. The county sat along the Tennessee-North Carolina border, riddled with dense forest, steep ravines, and isolated homesteads where families had lived for generations. The call came in just after midnight on June 12th. A hunter had discovered an abandoned vehicle on a rarely used Forest Service road near the county line. Standard procedure. Tanner would check it out himself. He'd handled countless abandoned vehicles over the years, usually belonging to drunk teenagers, stranded tourists, or occasionally, someone who'd wandered too far into the woods. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Tanner's cruiser crawled up the narrow dirt road. His headlights caught the blue sedan parked at an odd angle, its driver's door hanging open. The dome light still glowed faintly inside, battery nearly drained. Tanner swept his flashlight across the scene. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing outwardly concerning, except for the unusual location. The car was registered to a Martin Wells from Nashville, over 3 hours away. Inside the vehicle, Tanner found a map, a half-empty water bottle, and a notebook with coordinates jotted down. The coordinates marked locations deep in the forest, on land that straddled both counties and belonged to a mixture of federal preserves and old family properties. Tanner radioed dispatch to report the vehicle and request information on Wells. The response was puzzling. No criminal record, 42 years old, geology professor at Vanderbilt University. By morning, with no sign of Wells, Tanner organized a search party. The professor's wife reported he had been researching old mining operations in the area, but should have returned 2 days earlier. 6 hours into the search, they found Wells' backpack beside a steep ravine, contents undisturbed. The search expanded over the next 3 days, but yielded nothing. No body, no blood trail, no other personal effects. What unnerved Tanner was the location itself. The coordinates in Wells' notebook led to areas where, years earlier, hikers had occasionally gone missing. Those disappearances had been attributed to treacherous terrain, wild animals, or people simply getting lost. Nothing connected them except geography, until now. A week into the investigation, Tanner received a package addressed to the Sheriff of Millbrook County. Inside was a VHS tape without markings and a typed note. Found this in my father's things after he passed. He worked for the Forest Service from 1978 to 1994. I think you should see it. No return address, no signature. That evening, alone in his office, Tanner played the tape. The grainy footage showed Forest Service employees documenting a strange discovery. What appeared to be an old mining tunnel, its entrance partially collapsed. The timestamp indicated July 1983, 8 years earlier. The camera followed workers as they cleared debris, revealing crude wooden supports and narrow passages descending into darkness. The footage cut abruptly, then resumed inside the tunnel. Workers commented on unusual rock formations and what one called unnatural symmetry to the tunnel design. 17 minutes in, the camera panned across a chamber where the walls were covered with crude symbols etched into the stone. Not mining notations, but something more deliberate. The Forest Service geologist on site appeared visibly disturbed, stating, "These aren't from the 1920s operations. These are much older." In the final minutes of footage, workers discovered a small opening leading to another chamber. As they widened it, the camera caught a glimpse of what lay beyond, scattered bones on the chamber floor. The tape ended abruptly with someone shouting to get out. Tanner sat in silence, the static from the TV, the only sound in his office. The coordinates in Wells' notebook matched the location shown in the tape. The next morning, Tanner drove to the Forest Service regional office. The records supervisor, a woman named Eleanor Garrity, who'd worked there for 30 years, turned pale when Tanner mentioned the 1983 tunnel exploration. "That site was sealed," she said flatly, "by federal order." When Tanner pressed, she reluctantly retrieved a thin file. According to the documents, the tunnel had been deemed unsafe and sealed shut. No mention of bones or symbols. The names of those in the video were listed. All had transferred to different districts or retired, except one, Alan Mercer, who had died in a hiking accident in 1984, less than a year after the recording. Eleanor leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "People talk about those woods, always have. Old families won't go near certain places. There's history there that doesn't make it into official reports." Tanner spent the next week quietly investigating, reviewing missing persons reports dating back decades. He found 23 cases within a 10-mile radius of those coordinates, spread across 40 years. Most were classified as accidents or exposure, hikers, campers, the occasional local who should have known better. But the pattern was undeniable. 13 days after Wells' disappearance, Tanner received a call from the sheriff in the neighboring county. A hiker had found a camera hanging from a tree branch near the county line. The film, when developed, contained 11 photos. The first 9 showed various geological formations, clearly taken by Wells. The 10th showed the entrance to a tunnel, partially obscured by vegetation. The 11th was blurred, but unmistakably captured a human figure watching from among the trees. Tall, gaunt, dressed in what appeared to be ragged clothes. Tanner organized another search, this time with officers from both counties. They located the tunnel entrance from the photograph, hidden behind thick undergrowth. It had been opened recently, the old federal seals broken. Inside, they found Wells' wallet, keys, and a single boot, approximately 50 yards in. Beyond that, the tunnel forked into multiple passages. The search team spent hours exploring, finding only abandoned mining equipment and collapsed sections. In the deepest passage, Tanner's flashlight illuminated walls, covered with the same strange symbols from the video. As he photographed them, his radio crackled with static. A voice, barely audible, came through. "James, get out now." It was his deputy, who had been watching the entrance. Seconds later, they heard a gunshot echo through the tunnels. The team rushed back to find the deputy wide-eyed, gun drawn. "Something moved out there," he stammered, "just at the tree line. Wasn't natural how it moved." That night, reviewing his photographs, Tanner noticed something the search team had missed. Behind one of the symbols, barely visible, was a narrow crevice. It looked just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Tanner returned the next day with 3 officers. They located the crevice and widened it enough to pass through. Beyond was a chamber unlike the rest of the mine, the walls smoother, the ceiling higher. At its center was a crude stone table surrounded by bones, animal and human, old and new. Among the remains, they found Martin Wells's other boot, his watch, and his wedding ring. The investigation that followed became the most extensive in the county's history. The FBI arrived, anthropologists examined the bones, and the tunnels were thoroughly mapped. Some of the remains dated back over a century. Others were more recent, including bones that would later be identified as belonging to 3 hikers who had vanished in the area in 2013, 2014, and 1990. What they never found was Martin Wells himself, or whoever was responsible for the collection of remains. The official report concluded that the site had been used by a serial killer who likely operated for decades, using the remote location and abandoned mine to hide victims. The case remains open, with no suspects identified. Sheriff Tanner retired the following year, citing health concerns. Before leaving office, he sealed his personal notes on the case to be opened only in the event of his death. In those notes, which remained sealed until Tanner passed away in 2016, he wrote, "What we found goes beyond a single killer. The symbols match no known language but appear on rocks throughout those woods, some carved centuries ago according to the anthropologists. Local families have legends about the watchers in the trees, going back to first settlement. The oldest bones in that chamber predate the mine by at least 50 years. Whatever watches those woods is still there. I've seen it twice since we sealed the tunnel, once from my car on County Road 17, and once outside my bedroom window. Tall, impossibly thin, patient. The FBI can call it a serial killer. Those of us who've lived here all our lives know better. This land was never ours. We just pretend otherwise." The tunnel was sealed again, this time with concrete and under 24-hour guard, until the work was complete. The forest has reclaimed the area, and most locals avoid it entirely. Every few years, another vehicle is found abandoned near the county line. Sometimes belongings are recovered. The people never are. Sheriff Ray Dalton's cruiser rolled to a stop, its headlights illuminating the weathered sign. "Welcome to Blackwood County. Population 16,742. After 14 years as a homicide detective in Cincinnati, he'd traded urban chaos for the relative quiet of rural Virginia, accepting the sheriff's position in this small county nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The move was supposed to be a fresh start after a divorce and the stress of city police work, fewer homicides, more lost pets, and minor disputes. By June 2003, 6 months into the job, Dalton had settled into a comfortable routine. Locals had warmed to him despite his outsider status, appreciating his professionalism and lack of small-town politics. The county's crime rate was exactly what he'd hoped for. Manageable property crimes, occasional domestic disturbances, and the random DUI. Then came the first disappearance. Emma Reese, 29, failed to arrive at her mother's house for Sunday dinner. Her car was found the next morning on County Road 27, a remote stretch of highway that locals called the back way. The vehicle had a flat tire but showed no signs of struggle. Emma's purse remained on the passenger seat, her cell phone inside it, with several missed calls from her concerned mother. The search lasted 5 days. Volunteers combed the dense woods on either side of the road, while Dalton coordinated with state police. When they finally found Emma, 3 miles from her car, deep in the forest, her body showed no obvious trauma, no gunshot wounds, no stab marks, no blunt force injuries. The medical examiner determined she had died from exposure, having become disoriented after leaving her vehicle. A tragic accident, but not unprecedented in the rugged terrain. Dalton never felt completely satisfied with the conclusion. Why would Emma, a lifelong resident familiar with the area, wander so far from the road? Why not follow the highway to the nearest house, less than 2 miles away? The case file remained open on his desk longer than necessary before he reluctantly filed it away. 3 weeks later, it happened again. This time, a salesman from Richmond named Paul Mercer. His rental car found on the same stretch of highway, keys in the ignition, engine still running. The search teams found him 4 days later, 2 miles from his vehicle in the opposite direction from where Emma had been found. Again, no signs of violence. The medical examiner's ruling: exposure and dehydration. By the third disappearance, a college student returning home for summer break, Dalton recognized the pattern. All 3 vehicles had been found within a 5-mile stretch of County Road 27. All 3 victims had apparently wandered into the woods rather than staying with their vehicles or following the road to safety, actions that contradicted basic survival instincts. All three had died from exposure, despite weather conditions that shouldn't have been fatal within the time frames involved. When Dalton began researching prior incidents along that highway, the county clerk, Martha Wilson, gave him a curious look. "You're not the first to notice," she said quietly, pulling out folders dating back to 1974. "Every few years, someone goes missing out there, usually written up as accidents or exposure." The records revealed 12 similar cases over 29 years, all discovered within the same 10-mile radius, all ruled accidental deaths, all found in the woods, having apparently abandoned functional vehicles or walked away from the highway for no discernible reason. Dalton brought in state investigators who found nothing conclusive. The FBI reviewed the case, but determined there wasn't enough evidence of foul play to justify federal involvement. The highway remained open, despite Dalton's concerns. It was a crucial connector for several remote communities. In late September, after the fourth disappearance that year, Dalton received a visitor at the sheriff's office, Walter Kirby, the previous sheriff who had retired after serving for 22 years. Kirby was now in his 70s, his once imposing frame stooped with age. "Heard you've been looking into the highway incidents," Kirby said, settling heavily into the chair across from Dalton's desk. "Thought you might want to know about the investigation we did back in '87. According to Kirby, after 3 disappearances that year, they'd set up continuous patrols along County Road 27. For 6 weeks, officers monitored the stretch around the clock. No incidents occurred during the surveillance period. The day after they ended the patrols, a local farmer vanished while driving home from town. His truck was found at the now familiar section of highway. His body turned up 4 days later, 3 miles into the forest. We never found what was causing it," Kirby admitted. "But we did find something strange. Every victim had stopped their vehicle voluntarily. No evidence of accidents or mechanical failures in most cases. And we found footprints around some of the vehicles, not belonging to the victims." "You think someone was targeting them?" Dalton asked. "Maybe. But here's what kept me up at night. In 2 cases, we found other vehicles parked nearby around the estimated time of disappearance. Witnesses who should have seen something, but they reported nothing unusual. Just an empty vehicle on the side of the road. No struggling victim, no suspicious person, nothing." That night, Dalton drove to the highway alone. The road cut through dense forest, with steep ravines dropping away on one side and thick woods rising on the other. Cell reception was spotty at best. Even in daylight, it felt isolated. At night, the darkness between the occasional streetlights was absolute. He parked at the center of the 5-mile stretch where most of the vehicles had been found. Sitting in his cruiser with the engine running and lights off, he observed the road and surrounding forest. Around midnight, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. A sedan slowed as it approached, then pulled onto the shoulder about 50 yards behind him. Dalton watched through his side mirror as the driver's door opened and a figure stepped out. A middle-aged man who looked at his front tire, then pulled out a cell phone, presumably checking for reception. Finding none, the man leaned against his car, apparently deciding to wait. Dalton was about to reveal his presence when the man suddenly straightened, staring intently into the woods. He took several steps toward the tree line, head tilted as if listening. Then, inexplicably, he began walking into the forest. Dalton grabbed his flashlight and radio, calling for backup as he exited his vehicle. "Sir, Sheriff's Department," he shouted, but the man continued walking, now moving at an unnaturally steady pace between the trees. Following at a run, Dalton kept his flashlight trained on the man's back. Despite the uneven terrain and darkness, the stranger maintained his pace, never stumbling, never looking back. When Dalton was within 20 feet, the man suddenly veered behind a large oak tree. By the time Dalton reached the tree, the man was gone. The forest floor showed no signs of which direction he had taken. Dalton's flashlight beam cut through the darkness in all directions, revealing nothing but trees and underbrush. He called out repeatedly, his voice echoing among the trunks. No response. Backup arrived 15 minutes later. The search continued until dawn, covering a 1-mile radius from where Dalton had lost sight of the man. They found nothing, no footprints continuing beyond the tree, no broken branches indicating passage, no sign the man had ever existed except for his still-running vehicle on the highway. Inside the car, they found a wallet identifying the driver as Michael Thornton, 47, from Staunton. His cell phone showed he had tried to make 3 calls after stopping, none of which had connected. Otherwise, the vehicle and its contents appeared normal. The search for Thornton continued for 6 days. His body was never found. The incident haunted Dalton. He had been less than 20 feet away, yet somehow lost a full-grown man in open woods. The impossibility of it gnawed at him. 2 weeks later, he requested traffic cameras be installed along the highway, an unusual expense for a rural county that required special approval from the county board. The cameras were operational by mid-November. For 3 months, nothing unusual occurred. Then, in February 2004, the first camera captured footage of a pickup truck stopping along the highway around 9:15 p.m. The driver, later identified as local construction worker Jack Harmon, exited his vehicle and appeared to speak to someone off camera. He then walked into the woods and disappeared from view. When officers arrived 30 minutes later, responding to an automated alert about the abandoned vehicle, they found Harmon's truck with the engine running. The camera footage showed no other person or vehicle in the vicinity before Harmon's arrival or after his departure. Dalton requested forensic analysis of the area where Harmon had appeared to be speaking to someone. The results came back conclusive. There were no footprints other than Harmon's own. Whatever had drawn him into the forest had left no physical trace. After this incident, Dalton took the extraordinary step of closing the highway at night. Warning signs were posted at both ends. County Road 27 closed sunset to sunrise. Use alternate routes. Local residents protested the inconvenience, but Dalton stood firm. No further disappearances occurred. 6 months later, under pressure from the county board, and with no new incidents to justify the closure, the highway was reopened to night traffic. Within 2 weeks, another vehicle was found abandoned. The pattern has continued sporadically to this day. Now retired, Dalton still lives in Blackwood County. He refuses to drive on County Road 27 under any circumstances, and has compiled an extensive file on the disappearances, 29 cases over 47 years. The official explanation remains the same. People experiencing car trouble become disoriented in the unfamiliar forest. Locals know better. They avoid the lost highway after dark, and if they must travel it, they follow one strict rule. Whatever you see or hear, never stop your car. Sheriff Dalton's personal files contain one final note. Something hunts on that road. It doesn't leave footprints, it doesn't disturb the ground, and it can make you walk willingly to your death. I saw it happen. I was 20 feet away, and I couldn't stop it. The highway remains open. People still disappear. Sheriff Daniel Reeves had always considered himself a good judge of character. 23 years in law enforcement in rural Montana had honed his instincts for reading people, which made the Robert Owens case all the more disturbing. Clearwater County sprawled across 3,500 square miles of mountains, forests, and scattered towns, where everybody knew everybody. As county sheriff, Reeves prided himself on maintaining a personal connection with the community. He knew the troublemakers, the do-gooders, and most importantly, he knew the ordinary folks who made up the heart of the county. Robert Owens had moved to the area in the spring of 2008, purchasing a modest 2-story house on 5 acres just outside the town of Pinecrest. A retired accountant from Seattle in his early 60s, Owens quickly integrated into the community, joining the local historical society, volunteering at the library, and attending town council meetings. He was polite, soft-spoken, and well-liked, often bringing homemade cookies to community events. In the 3 years since his arrival, he'd never had so much as a speeding ticket. On October 17, 2011, that changed. The call came in at 7:13 a.m. A hiker had discovered a shallow grave in the woods about 4 miles from town. By 8 a.m., Reeves was standing over the partially uncovered remains of what appeared to be a young woman. The state crime lab team was already en route, but wouldn't arrive for several hours due to the remote location. Initial examination suggested the victim had been dead for approximately 2 weeks. The grave was shallow, but carefully prepared, lined with plastic sheeting underneath, and a layer of lime powder over the body. This wasn't a panicked disposal. It was methodical. Within 3 days, the victim was identified as Melissa Carson, a 26-year-old waitress who had disappeared from a neighboring county 17 days earlier. Her car had been found abandoned at a trailhead popular with hikers, leading investigators to initially suspect she had met with an accident in the wilderness. The discovery of her body, showing signs of strangulation, shifted the investigation to homicide. What disturbed Reeves most was the location of the grave. It was in a remote area, accessible only by a logging road, and then a half-mile hike through dense forest. Whoever buried her knew the area well, knew it would be rarely visited, especially in October, when the hiking season was winding down. Only a local would have chosen that particular spot. A week into the investigation, with few leads developing, Reeves decided to conduct a thorough search of the area around the burial site. It was during this search that Deputy Collins made a discovery that changed everything. A weathered trail camera strapped to a tree approximately 60 yards from the gravesite. Trail cameras were common in the area, used by hunters to track animal movements. What was uncommon was finding one so far from any hunting grounds. When they retrieved the memory card and reviewed the footage, they found images dating back nearly 3 years, captured at 2-week intervals. The camera had been programmed to take a single photo every 14 days at precisely 3:00 a.m. Most images showed nothing but dark forest. Occasionally, deer or other wildlife appeared. But beginning in April 2011, something changed. A figure in dark clothing began appearing in some nighttime shots, always at a distance, sometimes carrying what appeared to be tools. The quality of the nighttime images was too poor to identify the person. Then came the image from October 1st, 2011. The figure clearly visible, illuminated by the camera's flash, carrying a shovel and standing near what would later become Melissa Carson's grave. Though the face was partially obscured by a hat, Reeves immediately recognized Robert Owens. The search warrant for Owens's property was executed the following morning. What they found exceeded Reeves's worst expectations. Hidden in a false wall in the basement were dozens of journals detailing Owens's activities over the past 20 years. Activities that spanned 4 states and included detailed accounts of 7 murders, complete with photographs of the victims both before and after death. Most disturbing was the evidence that Owens had been monitoring his victims for months before abducting them, learning their routines, studying their habits. The journals described in clinical detail how he selected and stalked each victim, how he abducted them, what he did to them before their deaths, and where he buried them. One journal entry particularly haunted Reeves. Watched MC again today. Third time this week. She smiles at everyone. Doesn't know I exist. Doesn't know I'm watching. They never do. In the attic, investigators discovered a makeshift darkroom where Owens had developed thousands of photographs of unsuspecting people, shopping, working, walking their dogs. Many of these people were local residents Reeves knew personally. Some photos had been taken through windows at night. Others showed people in their yards or driveways. Dozens showed Reeves himself at crime scenes, at the grocery store, mowing his lawn, washing his car. As the search continued, investigators found a locked shed behind the house. Inside was a collection of items belonging to victims: jewelry, driver's licenses, credit cards. Among them was Melissa Carson's pendant necklace, still in its evidence bag. Evidence bag. The realization hit Reeves like a physical blow. He recognized the distinctive evidence bags used by his department. The only way Owens could have obtained one was if he had access to the sheriff's department evidence room. A thorough background check revealed that Robert Owens was an identity assumed in 2007. Before that, he had been Richard Owens, then Ronald Overton, then Raymond Olson, a series of identities, each lasting 3 to 5 years. His fingerprints matched those of Timothy Wells, a former evidence technician for the Seattle Police Department, who had disappeared in 1994 after being questioned about missing evidence. Wells had been briefly suspected in a series of unsolved murders, but was cleared due to lack of evidence. In a hidden compartment in Owens's desk, they found visitor passes to numerous police departments across 4 states, volunteer badges for community programs run by law enforcement, and a collection of police scanners programmed to local frequencies. For 20 years, Owens had been hiding in plain sight, integrating himself into communities, building trust, and establishing relationships with local law enforcement. He attended the same church as one of Reeves's deputies. He had been to the sheriff's annual summer barbecue. He had volunteered to photograph the department's charity softball game the previous summer. Most chilling was the discovery of detailed notes about the Carson investigation. Notes that could only have come from someone with access to case files or team briefings. Owens had been monitoring the investigation into his own crime, staying one step ahead. When questioned by Reeves, Owens maintained a calm, almost amused demeanor. "You passed me in the grocery store last Tuesday," he said with a slight smile. "You were worried about something. I could tell by the way you were frowning at the cereal boxes. I was standing right next to you, and you never even noticed me." As the case developed, investigators connected Owens to 11 murders across Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Oregon, spanning more than 2 decades. In each case, he had lived quietly in the community for years before and after the killings, often developing relationships with local law enforcement through volunteer work or community organizations. The trail camera that had captured his image, his ultimate mistake, had not been placed by hunters as initially assumed. Evidence suggested another hiker had placed it after noticing disturbed ground in the area. That hiker had never retrieved it or reported what, if anything, they had seen. Despite extensive searches, no additional remains were found in the area. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence of Owens's methodical approach to murder. For each victim, he created detailed surveillance files, learning their habits and routines. He staged careful rehearsals, timing entry and exit routes from their homes. He selected burial sites years in advance, preparing them slowly over time with periodic visits. Most disturbing was his pattern of inserting himself into the subsequent investigations, attending community meetings about the missing persons, volunteering for search parties, and in some cases, directly approaching investigators with helpful information. Psychological evaluations described Owens as a classic psychopath with narcissistic tendencies. He viewed his murders as intellectual exercises, challenges to be overcome through careful planning and execution. He took pride in his ability to move undetected through communities, to be seen but not remembered, to establish trust while planning violence. The trick, he told one psychiatrist, is to be ordinary enough to be trusted, but forgettable enough to disappear in plain sight. I've stood in line behind officers who were actively investigating me. I've held doors open for detectives carrying my case files. None of them ever saw me. Not really. Owens was sentenced to multiple life terms without possibility of parole. He died in prison 3 years later, taking the locations of his other victims to his grave. For Sheriff Reeves, the case fundamentally changed how he viewed his community and his role within it. The man who had attended his department cookouts, who had volunteered at the county fair information booth, who had been unanimously approved by the library board to work with children's reading programs, had been a predator hiding in plain sight. "We look for the threat at the periphery," Reeves later wrote in a Law Enforcement Journal article about the case. "We watch the shadows, the strangers, the obvious dangers. Owens taught me that sometimes the greatest threat is sitting across from you at the coffee shop, wearing a friendly smile and asking about your family. He wasn't hiding in the darkness. He was hiding in the light, in plain sight, counting on our human tendency to trust what seems familiar." Before his retirement in 2018, Reeves developed a training program for rural law enforcement focused on identifying predators like Owens, individuals who use their understanding of small-town dynamics and community trust to facilitate their crimes. The program, now implemented in police academies across 17 states, is called the Watchman Protocol, named for a chilling line found in Owens's journals. "I'm not just watching them. I'm watching those who think they're watching out for them. I see the sheriff drive by my house every morning at 7:15. He waves, I wave back. He thinks he's the watchman of this town. He doesn't realize I'm watching him." To this day, some of the evidence photos recovered from Owens' home remain sealed by court order due to their disturbing nature. Among them are hundreds of images of unsuspecting officers going about their daily duties, eating lunch, pumping gas, shopping with their families, all photographed by a killer they never noticed standing right beside them. Sheriff Maya Cortez had never seen anything quite like it. 22 years in law enforcement, the last 7 as sheriff of Pinewood County, had exposed her to the full spectrum of human behavior. But the Blackwood case was different. It was the kind of case that changes how you see the world, that makes you question the ordinary. Pinewood County occupied a quiet corner of rural Oregon, where dense forests gave way to small towns and scattered farms. Maya had grown up here, left for the police academy, then returned to raise her own family in the safety of these mountains. The county saw its share of crimes, domestic disputes, drug offenses, occasional burglaries, but nothing like what would eventually be discovered at 1421 Whispering Pines Road. The first call came on a Tuesday morning in April 2016. Ellen Blackwood, a 37-year-old high school English teacher, reported strange noises in her house. The dispatcher noted it as a routine check, nothing urgent. Deputy Wilson responded, found nothing suspicious, and filed it as a possible raccoon in the attic. Standard procedure. 3 days later, Ellen called again. This time, she reported finding objects moved in her home while she was at work. Small things, easily overlooked. A coffee mug on the wrong shelf. A book face down when she always used bookmarks. Her hairbrush on the opposite side of the bathroom sink. Deputy Wilson checked for signs of forced entry. found none, and suggested she change her locks. By the third call a week later, Maya decided to handle the situation personally. Ellen was well respected in the community, not prone to exaggeration or attention-seeking. When Maya arrived at the modest two-story house, nestled among towering pines, Ellen looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept in days. "I know how this sounds," Ellen said as she led Maya through the house. "But someone is coming into my home. They're touching my things. Sometimes I hear noises at night. Not just the house settling, but footsteps. I've lived here for 4 years. I know what my house sounds like." Maya conducted a thorough search of the property. The house was older, built in the 1930s, with multiple additions over the decades creating a somewhat labyrinthine layout. The basement was partially finished, with one section remaining rough concrete and fieldstone. An inspection revealed no signs of break-in or unauthorized entry. "Install a security system," Maya suggested. "Camera doorbells, motion-activated lights. I'll have a deputy drive by regularly for the next few weeks." Ellen nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. What if they're already inside? The question lingered with Maya as she drove away. Standard procedure would classify this as an overwrought homeowner imagining things, yet something about Ellen's quiet certainty was unsettling. 3 weeks passed without incident. Maya had almost forgotten about the case when Ellen called the station directly, bypassing 911. Her voice was nearly a whisper. "Someone was in my bedroom last night while I was sleeping. I woke up and could feel them standing there. When I turned on the light, no one was there. But my closet door was open. I always keep it closed." Maya arrived 20 minutes later with 2 deputies. This time, they conducted an exhaustive search, checking every closet, crawl space, and storage area, moving furniture to examine behind it, even inspecting the attic. As they prepared to leave, frustrated and empty-handed, Deputy Torres called from the basement. "Sheriff, you need to see this." In the unfinished section of the basement, Torres had noticed something odd about one wall. The fieldstone foundation appeared solid, but when he pressed against one section, it moved slightly. Closer inspection revealed a cleverly disguised panel, designed to blend perfectly with the surrounding stone. When opened, it revealed a narrow passage leading into darkness. "Get Ellen out of the house," Maya ordered Torres. "Call for backup and get the state police here." The passage, they would later discover, led to a small room hidden between the walls of the house. Inside was evidence of long-term habitation: a thin mattress, bottled water, packaged food, a chemical toilet, and, most disturbing, a collection of items belonging to Ellen. Hairbrushes with strands of her hair, worn clothing items, photos taken through windows or from doorways, showing her in various rooms of her own home. On the wall hung a crude diagram of the house's layout, with notes about Ellen's daily routines: when she showered, when she slept, which stairs creaked, which doors were rarely opened. The occupant had been living in Ellen's house for at least 6 months, coming and going through a second hidden entrance that opened into a storm drain at the edge of the property. The investigation that followed revealed something even more disturbing. The house's unusual architecture hadn't been the result of random additions. It had been deliberately designed with hidden passages, peepholes, and secret rooms by its original owner, Edmund Blackwood, Ellen's great-uncle. County records showed Edmund had built the house in 1932 and lived there until his death in 1979. He had been a reclusive figure who worked as a contractor, building or renovating at least 11 other homes in the county. Ellen, who had inherited the house after her parents died, had known nothing about its hidden features. She had grown up in Seattle, only visiting the house occasionally as a child. The family had rented it out for decades before Ellen decided to move in after accepting a teaching position at the local high school. The most unsettling discovery came when investigators identified the hidden room's occupant through fingerprints and DNA evidence. Gabriel Mercer, 42, had been a student of Edmund Blackwood's building techniques. As a teenager, he had helped the aging contractor with various projects. After Edmund's death, Gabriel had continued studying the old man's architectural drawings and journals, which contained detailed plans for what Edmund called observation spaces, hidden areas from which the house's occupants could be watched without their knowledge. For nearly 30 years, Gabriel had been living intermittently in various houses Edmund had built or renovated, staying for months or even years before moving to another location. He knew the hidden entrances, the secret passages, the observation points. He had keys to spaces the homeowners didn't know existed. Most disturbing was Gabriel's journal, found in a waterproof container in the hidden room. It contained detailed observations of not just Ellen, but the previous tenants as well, their habits, conversations, private moments. The entries stretched back decades, suggesting Gabriel had been using the hidden network of rooms since his early 20s. They never look up, one entry read. Even when they sense something, they look at doors and windows. They never think about the spaces between walls, the eyes that might be watching from above. The investigation expanded to other homes Blackwood had built or renovated. 7 were found to contain similar hidden spaces, though none were currently occupied. In 3 of these homes, residents reported experiences similar to Ellen's: objects moving, strange noises, feelings of being watched, but had attributed them to imagination or ordinary explanations. Gabriel was arrested at his workplace, a hardware store, where he had been employed for 15 years. Co-workers described him as quiet but friendly, unremarkable in every way. He had never been married, lived alone in a small apartment, and had no criminal record beyond a single speeding ticket. Nothing in his public life suggested what he did in the shadows. During interrogation, Gabriel showed no remorse or concern. He spoke about his activities with clinical detachment, as if discussing a hobby. People are most interesting when they think they're alone, he told investigators. You never really know someone until you've watched them, when they believe no one is looking. Edmund understood that. He built his houses so he could study people. I just continued his work. When asked why he had focused on Ellen, his response was chilling in its simplicity. She sings to herself when she thinks no one is listening. I wanted to hear more songs. Psychiatric evaluation diagnosed Gabriel with voyeuristic disorder and schizoid personality disorder. He exhibited no empathy for his victims, viewing them as subjects for observation rather than people whose privacy he had violated. More concerning was his insistence that he had never harmed anyone physically. I just wanted to watch and listen. Despite evidence that he had sometimes drugged residents' food or drinks to ensure they wouldn't wake during his nighttime movements. The case against Gabriel resulted in multiple felony convictions, including burglary, stalking, invasion of privacy, and illegal surveillance. He received a sentence of 25 years, without possibility of early parole. For Sheriff Maya Cortez, the case fundamentally changed how she viewed the homes and buildings in her county. The idea that the walls themselves might contain hidden observers had transformed ordinary architecture into something potentially sinister. During the months following Gabriel's arrest, her department received dozens of calls from anxious homeowners requesting inspections of their properties. The county eventually established a task force dedicated to identifying and securing all homes built or renovated by Edmund Blackwood. They found hidden passages in 17 properties, some so cleverly designed that they would have remained undetected without Gabriel's detailed maps. The passages were sealed, the hidden rooms exposed and integrated into the home's regular living spaces. Ellen Blackwood never returned to the house on Whispering Pines Road. She stayed with friends until finding a new home, a recently built apartment with concrete walls and no crawl spaces. The Blackwood house remained empty for years, its reputation making it unsellable despite extensive renovations to remove all hidden spaces. In 2019, 3 years after Gabriel's arrest, Maya was called to the county jail, where he was awaiting transfer to a state facility following the completion of his appeals process. He had requested to speak with her specifically, claiming to have important information. "There are others," he told her when they met in the visitation room. "Edmund had students besides me. We don't all know each other. He kept us separate, but we know about each other. We're like a family spread across the country, continuing his work. Some build the spaces, some use them, some do both." When pressed for details, Gabriel would only say, "Look at the houses built between 1965 and 1979. Look for the symbol, a small triangle inside a circle, usually carved into a basement support beam or under a windowsill. That's how we mark them. That's how we know which houses have eyes." Maya launched an investigation into Gabriel's claims, but found no evidence of such a network. The symbol he described appeared in only one other location, carved into Edmund Blackwood's headstone in the county cemetery. Architectural reviews of homes built during the period Gabriel mentioned revealed no additional hidden spaces. Yet something about Gabriel's calm certainty lingered with Maya. During his trial, he had never once tried to minimize his actions or seek a reduced sentence. He had admitted to everything, provided detailed maps and journals, and accepted his punishment without complaint. Why make up a story now? The question remained unanswered until 6 months after Gabriel's transfer to state prison, when Maya received a call from a sheriff in eastern Washington. They had arrested a man found living in the walls of a suburban home. In his possession was a journal nearly identical to Gabriel's, detailing observations of the family over an 18-month period. Under a basement windowsill, investigators had found a small triangle inside a circle. Maya now keeps a specialized team trained in identifying hidden architectural spaces. They have consulted with law enforcement agencies in 7 states, helping to discover similar cases. The phenomenon has been documented in at least 23 instances across the Pacific Northwest, all following the same pattern: hidden observers in spaces designed for concealment, watching unsuspecting residents. Edmund Blackwood's architectural drawings and journals were donated to the County Historical Society after Ellen's parents died. They were stored in the Society's archives until the investigation into Gabriel's activities. When officials went to retrieve them, they discovered that someone had checked them out 3 years earlier and never returned them. The signature on the checkout card was illegible. Sheriff Cortez still receives calls from residents who believe someone is watching them. She never dismisses these concerns, no matter how implausible they seem. Her standard advice has changed from what she once told Ellen Blackwood. "Look up," she tells them. "Look at the spaces between the walls. Look at the places you normally ignore. And if you find a small triangle inside a circle anywhere in your home, call me immediately." Most calls lead nowhere. But sometimes, in older homes with complex histories, investigators find evidence of observation spaces, places where someone could stand unseen, watching through pinhole openings, listening through air vents, documenting the private lives of those who believe themselves alone. The walls have eyes, the houses listen, and sometimes the spaces between are occupied by those who think watching is their right. Sheriff Darlene Harper had seen her fair share of crime scenes in 15 years with the department, but nothing quite like this. It was January 2011 in Glendale County, Michigan, where winter transformed the landscape into a blank canvas of white. The temperature had dipped below zero for 3 consecutive nights, creating the kind of cold that burned your lungs when you breathed too deeply. The call had come in at 3:47 a.m. A passerby reported an abandoned car on County Road 27, about 7 miles outside town. The car was running, driver's door open, but no one in sight. Standard procedure for their rural county. Check for a stranded motorist, possibly someone who'd wandered off disoriented in the cold. What they found instead was a 2008 Honda Civic, engine still idling, driver's side door wide open, and a woman's purse on the passenger seat. The car belonged to Natalie Weber, 32, a local nurse at Glendale Regional Hospital. The snow around the vehicle told a story that immediately sent alarm bells ringing. Footprints leading from the driver's side, then signs of a struggle, and a second set of prints, much larger. Both sets disappeared about 20 feet from the vehicle, where tire tracks indicated another car had been parked. Harper organized search teams immediately, knowing that exposure in these temperatures could be fatal within hours. But the fresh snowfall had already begun to obscure whatever trail might have existed. By dawn, with no sign of Natalie Weber, the case shifted from search and rescue to potential abduction. The investigation revealed Weber had finished her shift at the hospital at 11:30 p.m. and called her roommate to say she was stopping at the 24-hour grocery store before heading home. Security footage confirmed she had left the store at 12:17 a.m. The 7-mile stretch of County Road between the store and her house was sparsely populated, with only a handful of farms and the occasional hunting cabin. No witnesses, no cameras. 3 days into the investigation, with state police now involved, Harper received a call that changed everything. A hunter checking his trail cameras discovered images of what appeared to be a person being dragged through the snow in a remote wooded area about 4 miles from where Weber's car had been found. The timestamp showed 1:03 a.m. on the night of her disappearance. When Harper arrived at the location, they found disturbed snow around a dilapidated hunting cabin, long abandoned, according to locals. Inside, the scene was grim, blood spatter on the walls, signs of a violent struggle, and evidence someone had been held there, including zip ties attached to an old metal bed frame. But no victim. Forensics confirmed the blood matched Natalie Weber, but the amount suggested injury, not death. Whoever had taken her had moved her again. The trail had gone cold in more ways than one. Then came the development that would haunt Harper for years to come. Anonymous tips began arriving at the sheriff's department, detailed information about Weber's abduction, including facts not released to the public. The tipster described the interior of the cabin in perfect detail, explained that Weber had been taken because she had seen something she shouldn't have, and warned that she would never be found. The most disturbing aspect was the caller's intimate knowledge of the investigation itself, mentioning specific evidence only the investigation team would know, referencing conversations between officers at the scene, even describing what Harper had been wearing when she first examined Weber's car. "You won't find her because you're looking in the wrong places," one message stated. "The person you're looking for knows your next move before you make it." Harper began to suspect the information leak was coming from within her own department. She restricted case details to a smaller circle of trusted deputies and deliberately planted misinformation with different officers to see what might appear in the next anonymous message. 2 weeks after Weber's disappearance, another tip arrived, a hand-delivered envelope containing a hospital ID badge. Weber's badge, stained with blood. Surveillance footage showed a man in a delivery uniform dropping the envelope at the front desk of the sheriff's office. When tracked down, the delivery man had no recollection of who had paid him to deliver the package. The message inside read, "I'm watching you fail." Harper ordered a complete review of all hospital personnel, focusing on anyone who might have had contact with Weber. One name emerged: Frank Denton, a hospital security guard who had been fired 3 months earlier for inappropriate behavior toward female staff. Weber had filed one of the complaints that led to his termination. Denton's employment history revealed a pattern. He had worked at 3 different hospitals across 2 states over 6 years, each time leaving after complaints about his behavior. Before that, he had been briefly employed as a corrections officer, and before that, as a police dispatcher in a neighboring county. When officers went to question Denton at his residence, they found the house empty, mail piled up, no sign of him for at least a week. A search of the property uncovered a hidden room in the basement containing newspaper clippings about missing women from across the Midwest, spanning nearly a decade. But no physical evidence tied him to Weber's disappearance. The investigation stalled. Weeks turned into months. Harper worked the case obsessively, convinced the anonymous tipster was Denton himself, taunting them with his intimate knowledge of police procedure. But without evidence or a body, the case remained officially classified as a missing person. 6 months after Weber's disappearance, Harper received a call from a detective in Ohio. They had arrested a man for an attempted abduction of a nurse in a hospital parking lot. The suspect, Frank Denton, had in his possession newspaper clippings about Natalie Weber. Harper drove to Ohio immediately. When she walked into the interrogation room, Denton smiled at her with unnerving familiarity. "Sheriff Harper," he said before she could introduce herself, "you look exactly like your photos." The interview that followed was a psychological chess match. Denton denied any involvement in Weber's disappearance while demonstrating uncanny knowledge of the investigation. He asked about evidence they had found at the cabin, referenced statements from witnesses who had been interviewed, and even mentioned the weather conditions on the night Harper had examined Weber's abandoned car. "Must have been cold out there on County Road 27, he said casually. "The kind of night when your breath freezes in front of your face." Harper pushed harder. "How do you know what I found at the scene?" Denton's smile widened. "Maybe I was there." "Where is Natalie Weber?" Harper demanded. "Where you'll never find her," Denton replied. "But I could take you there." The deal that followed was controversial. Denton would lead them to Weber's remains in exchange for considerations in his sentencing for the Ohio case. Harper knew it might be the only way to bring closure to Weber's family. On a cold autumn morning, a convoy of police vehicles followed Denton's directions deep into state forest land, nearly 40 miles from where Weber's car had been found. He led them to a remote clearing where, under a shallow grave, forensic teams recovered Natalie Weber's remains. What Denton revealed during his subsequent confession chilled Harper to the bone. He had never worked with an accomplice, never had inside help from the department. His knowledge of the investigation came from something far more disturbing. He had been there, watching the investigators work. "I was standing in the trees when you found her car," he explained with disturbing pride. "I watched you examine the scene, heard you discussing evidence. I followed the search teams. I was at the cabin when your officers processed it, just outside in the woods, listening. I've been to the sheriff's office dozens of times during your investigation, walking right past your deputies. No one notices a delivery person, a repairman, someone in a uniform who looks like they belong. Most disturbing was his revelation about Harper herself. I was parked across the street from your house 3 nights after she disappeared, watched you through your kitchen window. You were drinking coffee, reviewing case files. You looked different with your hair down. The detail was correct. Harper had worked late at her dining table that night, hair loose after a shower, visible from the street through her kitchen window. The thought that Denton had been there, watching her, invaded her sense of safety in a way that would never fully heal. Denton's trial revealed the full extent of his crimes. 7 women across 3 states over 11 years, all abducted, held captive, eventually killed. In each case, he had stalked not only his victims, but also the investigators, gathering information, staying one step ahead. He had used his background knowledge of law enforcement to anticipate investigative techniques. His time as a hospital security guard had given him access to potential victims and their personal information. His nondescript appearance and collection of uniforms, delivery services, maintenance companies, even police uniforms, had allowed him to move through public spaces unnoticed. People see the uniform, not the person, he explained during testimony. I could walk into most buildings without anyone questioning me. For Sheriff Harper, the case fundamentally changed how she approached her work and her life. Security cameras were installed at her home. She varied her routes to and from work. Case discussions now took place only in secure rooms, never at crime scenes where someone might be listening from the shadows. The Weber case became required study at the State Police Academy, with Harper often giving lectures on the investigation. Her key message to cadets was always the same. The most dangerous predators aren't just watching their victims. They're watching you, studying how you work, learning your patterns and procedures. While you're looking for them, they're looking right back at you, sometimes from much closer than you think. Denton is currently serving multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. In his cell, according to prison guards, he keeps newspaper clippings about his cases, not just the crimes themselves, but photos of the investigators, including one of Sheriff Harper at a press conference, her expression resolute, despite the knowledge that for months, she hadn't just been the hunter. She had also been hunted. Sheriff Allison Keene had spent her entire 20-year career in law enforcement, working in Riverdale County, a quiet stretch of farmland and small towns along the Missouri River. At 45, she'd handled everything from domestic disputes to armed robberies, but nothing had prepared her for what began on a sweltering August morning in 2013. The call came in shortly after dawn. A farmer checking his fields had spotted what appeared to be a mannequin in his drainage ditch. By the time Keene arrived, the morning heat was already oppressive, shimmering above the cornfields that stretched to the horizon. The farmer, a weathered man in his 60s, led her to the scene without speaking, his expression grim. What waited in the ditch wasn't a mannequin. The body of a young woman lay partially submerged in muddy water, positioned with unsettling deliberateness, arms crossed over her chest, hair carefully arranged around her face. Most disturbing was her clothing, a blue dress that appeared decades out of style, meticulously clean despite the muddy surroundings. "That's not how I found her," the farmer said quietly. "She was face down when I called you. Someone moved her after." A chill ran through Keene despite the heat. The scene had been disturbed between the farmer's call and her arrival, 27 minutes during which someone had returned to reposition the body. The investigation revealed the victim was Teresa Langley, 24, reported missing 3 days earlier from a town 40 miles away. The cause of death was strangulation, but the medical examiner noted several peculiarities. Her body had been thoroughly washed, her nails trimmed and painted, her hair styled. The blue dress was vintage 1950s, not something Teresa had owned, according to her roommate. Most disturbing, the examiner found traces of formaldehyde on her skin. "Someone tried to preserve her," he explained to Keene. "Not professionally, but they made the attempt, and they dressed her like..." like they were preparing her for display. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Another young woman found in an isolated location, carefully positioned, dressed in vintage clothing. This time, a yellow sundress from the 1960s. Again, evidence suggested the body had been placed, removed, cleaned, and returned to the scene. The victim, Melissa Carver, had been missing for 5 days. By the third victim, discovered in late September, a pattern had emerged. Each woman had been strangled, cleaned, dressed in vintage clothing from a different decade, and arranged in a posed position. Each had been placed in a location where they would be found relatively quickly, and in each case, evidence suggested the killer had returned to the scene after the body was discovered. "He's watching us," Keene told her investigators. "He's coming back to see how we react to his displays." The FBI joined the investigation, bringing behavioral analysts who developed a disturbing profile. The killer was likely middle-aged, highly functioning in society, with a history of collecting vintage items. They theorized he viewed his victims as additions to a collection, each representing a different era. "He's selecting women who physically resemble certain ideals from these time periods," the lead profiler explained, then creating perfect representations through clothing, makeup, and posing. The fact that he returns to watch the discoveries suggests he sees this as a form of art exhibition. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in November, when Officer Davis was reviewing footage from traffic cameras near where the second victim had been found. 6 minutes after the estimated time of the body's discovery, a well-maintained vintage car, a 1968 Oldsmobile Cutlass, had driven slowly past the scene. The same vehicle appeared in footage near the third crime scene, this time 17 minutes after the body was located. The car was registered to Edward Phelps, 58, a respected antiques dealer whose shop in downtown Riverdale specialized in mid-century Americana. A preliminary background check revealed nothing suspicious. No criminal record, a long-standing business, active in the local historical society. Keene had even purchased a vintage desk lamp from his shop years earlier. Rather than approaching Phelps directly, Keene authorized surveillance. For 3 days, officers monitored his movements, noting his precise routines, his solitary lifestyle, his frequent trips to an old farmhouse he owned outside town. On the 4th day, they observed him loading what appeared to be a rolled carpet into his car and driving to the farmhouse. The search warrant was executed at dawn. What they found inside the farmhouse would haunt Keene for the rest of her career. The main floor appeared normal, dusty, underused, but containing nothing suspicious. The basement, however, had been transformed. 6 rooms, each meticulously decorated to represent a different decade from the 1950s through the 2000s. Period-appropriate furniture, wallpaper, lighting fixtures, creating perfect time capsules of each era. In the center of each room stood a display case containing a full-sized mannequin, dressed in vintage clothing. 3 of these cases were empty, corresponding to the 3 murdered women. A 4th case, in the 1970s room, contained the body of a woman they would later identify as Patricia Mills, missing for 2 weeks from a neighboring county. She had been posed standing upright, dressed in a floral polyester dress, her body partially preserved through amateur embalming techniques. Beside her, carefully arranged on a period-appropriate side table, lay the tools of Phelps's preservation process: surgical instruments, embalming fluids, makeup. The forensic team made another discovery in a hidden room behind the basement's furnace: detailed journals dating back 5 years, outlining Phelps's collection philosophy. He described how he had initially used mannequins to create his decade displays, but found them inauthentic and lacking soul. The journals documented his transition to human subjects, including his research into embalming techniques and his criteria for selecting women who embodied what he called the essence of each decade. Most disturbing were the photographs, hundreds of them, showing his victims in his recreated period rooms before they were transported to their final exhibition sites. The journals indicated he chose public discovery locations because art requires an audience. When Keene interviewed Phelps after his arrest, she was struck by his calm, almost professorial demeanor. He spoke of his victims as contributions to historical preservation and seemed genuinely confused by the horror his actions had caused. "I gave them permanence," he explained, his voice soft. "In my rooms, they'll never age, never change. They become perfect embodiments of their eras." When Keene pointed out that he had taken their lives, he simply shook his head. "I gave them new ones, better ones. They were ordinary before. Now, they're extraordinary." What unnerved Keene most was Phelps's detailed knowledge of the investigations. He had monitored police frequencies, attended community meetings about the murders, and even approached officers casually in his shop to ask about case progress. In his journal, he had critiqued the investigative techniques, noting with academic detachment where police had missed evidence or drawn incorrect conclusions. He had written about Keene specifically, analyzing her press conferences, predicting her investigative moves, even commenting on her expressions when viewing crime scenes. "Sheriff Keene appreciates the aesthetic elements," he wrote after the third discovery. "I observed her lingering over the arrangement of the hands. She understands composition on some level, though not my broader vision." The idea that Phelps had been watching her, studying her, as she investigated his crimes, created a vulnerability Keene had never experienced in her career. For months after his arrest, she found herself checking rearview mirrors, scanning faces in crowds, startling at unexpected sounds. The trial revealed the full extent of Phelps's collection plans. In a storage unit rented under a false name, investigators found 6 more vintage outfits, each carefully preserved in garment bags, labeled by decade, with names attached. 6 more women who had unknowingly been selected to complete his exhibition. Psychiatric evaluation diagnosed Phelps with a complex combination of disorders, including obsessive-compulsive tendencies, dissociative elements, and a complete lack of empathy, masked by well-developed social mimicry. He had functioned in society for decades while seeing people as potential artifacts, specifically women, who he viewed as more aesthetically suited to preservation. Phelps was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without possibility of parole. His case became a landmark study in forensic psychology, particularly focused on how someone could maintain such an extreme disconnect between public persona and private pathology. For Sheriff Keene, the case fundamentally changed her understanding of evil. The monsters weren't always hiding in shadows or acting from obvious mental disturbance. Sometimes they operated antique shops and donated to local charities and remembered your coffee preference when you visited their store. Before his transfer to a maximum security facility, Phelps requested a final meeting with Keene. Against the advice of the district attorney, she agreed, wanting closure for herself and the still haunted community. "You should know," Phelps told her, hands folded calmly on the table between them. "They were only the beginning. My collection exists in other places, under other names. Some of my earliest works are still waiting to be discovered." Extensive investigation found no evidence supporting this claim. Most believed it was a final attempt at manipulation, at maintaining some sense of control. But 5 years later, when a young deputy was clearing out Keene's office after her retirement, he found a sealed envelope Phelps had sent her from prison. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing a list of 6 towns across 3 states, with dates ranging from 1998 to 2005. Below them, a simple message: "My early galleries. Crude compared to what you found, but educational. Everyone starts somewhere." The FBI is still investigating these locations. 2 have yielded human remains in settings similar to those found in Riverdale County, though lacking the elaborate preparation of Phelps's later work. The others remain mysteries, potential sites of undiscovered victims, from a collector who viewed human beings as artifacts to be preserved, displayed, and admired in tableaus of his own disturbed creation. Sheriff Keene never returned to law enforcement after her retirement. She moved to Colorado, seeking distance from the case that defined the end of her career. But she keeps track of the ongoing investigations through former colleagues, waiting for confirmation of exactly how extensive Edward Phelps's collection truly was. And sometimes, when browsing antique stores or vintage shops, she finds herself studying the proprietors with a wary eye, wondering what collections they might curate behind closed doors. Sheriff Lena Torres had weathered many storms during her 12 years leading the department in Grand Creek County, Wyoming. Literal blizzards that isolated rural communities for days, and figurative ones in the form of budget crises, political challenges, and the occasional high-profile case. At 48, she had earned the respect of both her deputies and the tight-knit community of 17,000 spread across the county's vast, rugged landscape. But the winter of 2017 brought a different kind of storm, one that would fundamentally change how Torres viewed her role as the county's top law enforcement officer, and ultimately, how she understood the depths of human deception. It began with a 911 call on a frigid January evening. The department dispatcher, Ellen Whitaker, received a call from a woman reporting strange noises outside her isolated farmhouse. The caller identified herself as Margaret Sawyer, a 72-year-old widow who lived alone on a property at the end of County Road 19, about 15 miles outside the town center. Road conditions were treacherous after 3 days of heavy snow, but Deputy Carl Mendez was dispatched to check on the elderly resident. When Mendez radioed in 40 minutes later, his voice carried an unusual edge that immediately caught Torres's attention. "Sheriff, there's no one at the Sawyer residence. House is dark, no tracks in the snow, appears undisturbed." Torres frowned, looking at the dispatch report. "Check the neighboring properties. Maybe she got the address wrong." "That's just it," Mendez replied. "There is no Sawyer residence on County Road 19. I've checked every mailbox. No one by that name lives out here, and the property at the end of the road has been abandoned for years." Torres had the dispatcher call back the number, but it went straight to voicemail, a generic greeting with no name. A check of county records confirmed what Mendez had discovered. No Margaret Sawyer was listed as a property owner anywhere in the county. The phone number belonged to a prepaid cell phone that couldn't be traced to a specific individual. Under normal circumstances, Torres might have written it off as a prank call or a confused elderly person giving the wrong address. But something about the incident nagged at her. She requested the 911 recording and listened to it carefully that evening in her office. The caller's voice was calm, elderly, but clear. "There's someone outside my house. I can see a flashlight moving around by my barn." "Can you see who it is, ma'am?" the dispatcher asked. "No, but this is the 3rd night they've been out there. I live alone since my husband passed. I'm afraid." "I understand. I'll send an officer right away. Can you confirm your address?" The woman gave the non-existent address on County Road 19, then added something that gave Torres chills even in retrospect. "Please tell them to be careful. The last time someone came out here to help me, they never made it home." 2 days later, it happened again. A call came in from an elderly woman reporting prowlers, giving a different name, Eleanor Winters, but describing a similar isolated property, this time on County Road 32. Again, deputies found no such resident, no such property. Again, the call came from an untraceable prepaid phone. By the third call, a week later, Torres recognized the pattern forming. Each call came after dark. Each caller was an elderly woman living alone. Each reported prowlers or strange noises. Each gave an address that didn't exist on remote county roads. Each mentioned, almost casually, something vaguely threatening about previous visitors or helpers who had come to their non-existent properties. Torres assembled her investigative team, including county IT specialist Jason Weber. "I want to know where these calls are really coming from," she told them. "Someone's trying to lure my officers to remote locations in dangerous conditions. I want to know why." Weber traced the general vicinity of the calls using cell tower data, but could only narrow it down to an area of roughly 20 square miles, mostly open ranch land with scattered houses. The calls weren't long enough to get more precise locations. Torres decided to change tactics. The next time such a call came in, dispatchers were instructed to say that due to road conditions, response would be delayed until morning unless the situation was life-threatening. The goal was to see if the caller would escalate their story to force an immediate response. The call came 3 nights later. This time, the elderly woman identified herself as Virginia Kendall, claimed to live on County Road 8, and reported seeing someone trying to break into her garage. When told response would be delayed, the caller became more insistent. "You don't understand. He has tools. I can hear him prying at the door. Please, I'm all alone." "Ma'am, is your life in immediate danger?" the dispatcher asked, following the new protocol. There was a pause, longer than natural, before the caller replied, "Yes, I think he has a gun. I can see it." Torres had been listening to the exchange. "Keep her talking," she instructed the dispatcher. "We need more time to trace the call." But the caller seemed to sense the trap. "He's coming toward the house now. I have to hide. Please hurry." The line went dead. This time, however, Weber had been prepared. The extended call provided enough data to narrow the location to a 3-mile radius. Torres organized teams to check every property in the area, focusing on places with clear views of the county roads. 2 days into the search, Deputy Mendez noticed something odd about an old hunting cabin set back from County Road 27. Though it appeared unoccupied, fresh tire tracks led to a shed behind the main structure. When Torres arrived with a search warrant, what they found inside the shed sent a chill through the entire department. A small table held 3 prepaid cell phones, a voice modifier device, and printed maps of the county with specific roads highlighted. On the wall hung detailed schedules of patrol patterns, shift changes, and personnel assignments for the sheriff's department. Most disturbing was a bulletin board covered with photos, surveillance images of every deputy in the department, including Torres herself, taken while they were on patrol. Beneath the photos were handwritten notes about each officer. Takes County Road 8 at 2:15 a.m. during night shifts. Always responds alone to calls in Eastern Sector. Female, small build, carries Glock 17 vulnerable. In the cabin itself, they discovered evidence of long-term surveillance, high-powered spotting scopes, a police scanner, night vision equipment, and notebooks filled with detailed observations of department operations dating back nearly 6 months. What they didn't find was the occupant. The investigation quickly revealed the cabin had been purchased 3 months earlier by a man using the name Thomas Green, paying cash through a private sale. The seller reported nothing unusual about the buyer, just a guy who wanted a hunting place, mid-50s, kept to himself. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A state trooper reviewing the case file recognized similarities to incidents in eastern Idaho 2 years earlier, where someone had made fake emergency calls to draw officers to remote locations. In those cases, responding officers reported being followed on their return drives and, in 2 instances, having their vehicles disabled by caltrips, spiked devices designed to puncture tires, placed on isolated stretches of road. The suspect in those cases was never identified, but the trooper had kept detailed notes. The methods matched too closely to be coincidence. Torres now understood they were dealing with someone conducting careful surveillance of her department, studying patterns, testing response protocols, and likely preparing for something more dangerous than fake calls. The abandoned attempts suggested the perpetrator had been watching the officers' responses, likely from hiding spots along the county roads, evaluating which officers made the most vulnerable targets. She implemented immediate security measures. No deputy would respond to rural calls alone. Patrol routes would be randomized, and off-duty officers were advised to vary their personal routines. 2 tense weeks passed with no further fake calls. Then came the incident that would ultimately break the case. Deputy Sarah Conley was returning home after her shift when she noticed a vehicle that appeared to be disabled on a side road near her house. As department policy now required, she called for backup before approaching. While waiting, she observed a man working under the hood. Something about his movement struck her as performative rather than productive, as if he were putting on a show of fixing something rather than actually making repairs. When backup arrived, the man quickly closed the hood, claimed his car was working again, and departed before the officers could question him further. Conley, however, had managed to photograph his license plate. The vehicle was registered to Lawrence Parker, 57, a former corrections officer who had been forced to resign from a Wyoming state facility 5 years earlier after allegations of inappropriate conduct toward female colleagues. His employment record showed a pattern of grievances filed against him for stalking-like behavior, though no formal charges were ever filed. Most significant was Parker's last known address. He had lived in eastern Idaho during the time of the previous fake call incidents. When officers went to Parker's residence, a small apartment in a neighboring county, they found it empty except for basic furniture and boxes of surveillance equipment similar to what had been discovered in the cabin. Parker had disappeared. Over the following weeks, evidence mounted connecting Parker to an unsettling pattern of behavior toward law enforcement officers. His phone records revealed he had made calls to various police departments across 3 states, sometimes simply listening to dispatchers' voices, other times reporting minor incidents that would bring officers to locations where he could observe them. His computer contained folders with hundreds of photos of officers, predominantly female, taken during traffic stops or routine patrols. Most disturbing was a document titled Approach Strategies, which detailed scenarios for isolating officers in remote locations, including the fake elderly woman emergency calls. The psychological profile developed by FBI analysts painted a picture of a dangerously obsessed individual with a specific fixation on female authority figures in law enforcement. His history as a corrections officer had given him intimate knowledge of police procedures, while his forced resignation had likely triggered escalating resentment. 3 months after the discovery of the cabin, Lawrence Parker was arrested at a bus station in Montana, attempting to flee to Canada. In his possession were fake identification documents, $12,000 in cash, and a notebook containing new surveillance notes on a female sheriff in a Montana county. During interrogation, Parker initially maintained his innocence, claiming he was being framed. But when confronted with the evidence from the cabin and his computer, his demeanor changed. With unsettling pride, He explained how he had studied Torres's department, learning each deputy's habits, testing response patterns, and evaluating potential targets. "None of you ever looked up," he told investigators. "I was watching from hills, from tree lines, sometimes parked right along the road as you drove past. I could have reached out and touched your cars." When asked about his ultimate intentions, Parker became evasive. The approach strategies document, however, contained detailed plans for abducting a female officer after disabling her vehicle on a remote road. Parker eventually pleaded guilty to stalking, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and various charges related to the fake emergency calls. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. For Sheriff Torres and her department, the case permanently altered their sense of security. The realization that someone had been systematically studying them, watching their movements, learning their patterns, evaluating their vulnerabilities, while they remained completely unaware, was profoundly disturbing. Torres implemented permanent changes to department protocols, randomized patrol routes, mandatory partner responses to remote locations, regular sweeps for surveillance devices around the department and officers' homes, and enhanced training on recognizing surveillance and stalking behaviors. "We spend our careers watching for threats," Torres later wrote in a Law Enforcement Journal article about the case. But Parker taught us a brutal lesson about blind spots. While we were scanning for obvious dangers, he was hidden in plain sight, studying us far more carefully than we were watching for him. He knew our habits, our routines, our vulnerabilities, not because he was particularly clever, but because we were predictable. She ended the article with a warning that has since been incorporated into training programs across the country. The voice on the line might not belong to who you think it does, and while you're responding to the call, someone might be calling you. Parker remains in federal prison. His case files include notes from prison psychologists documenting his continued obsession with female law enforcement officers. His cell walls were once found covered with newspaper clippings about Sheriff Torres and other female officers he had surveilled. Sheriff Torres still serves Grand Creek County, but she never answers her home phone after dark. And on patrol, she finds herself constantly scanning, not just for threats ahead, but for watching eyes on distant hillsides, the unseen observer who might be taking notes on her movements, waiting for the perfect moment to make the call that brings help directly into harm's way. Sheriff Ben Holloway had spent 26 years in law enforcement, the last 11 as sheriff of Crawford County, Arizona. At 54, he'd developed the weary vigilance common to rural law enforcement. A county of 3,700 square miles and just under 30,000 residents meant long distances, limited backup, and the knowledge that sometimes you were the only thing standing between order and chaos. The Desert Pines Motel sat on a desolate stretch of Highway 60, 40 miles from the county seat. A relic from the 1960s, it had once thrived during the heyday of road travel, but now survived on a trickle of long-haul truckers, budget travelers, and the occasional tourist who had strayed from the interstate. 12 rooms, arranged in an L shape, a small office, and a flickering neon sign that hummed and crackled through the desert nights. Holloway had never paid much attention to the place. In his decades with the department, the motel had generated only minor incidents, the occasional drunk and disorderly, a domestic dispute between traveling couples, reports of suspicious vehicles that usually amounted to nothing. The owner, Vernon Gillis, kept to himself, ran a clean establishment, and was prompt with his tax payments and license renewals. That changed on October 12, 2019, when a highway patrol officer found an abandoned vehicle 2 miles east of the motel. The car belonged to a Phoenix couple, Michael and Jennifer Chen, who had been reported missing 3 days earlier after failing to arrive at a family gathering in Albuquerque. Their luggage was still in the trunk, but there was no sign of the Chens. The search centered on the surrounding desert at first. The case might have remained focused there, if not for Trooper Escobar's decision to check the Desert Pines Motel's registry. The Chens had indeed checked in 5 nights earlier, according to the logbook. However, Gillis claimed they had stayed only 1 night before checking out early the next morning. They seemed in a hurry, Gillis told Holloway when questioned. Paid cash, were gone before breakfast. I assumed they decided to push on to Albuquerque instead of breaking up the trip. Something about Gillis's manner, too helpful, too detailed, raised Holloway's instincts. 26 years in law enforcement teaches you to notice the subtle tells of a rehearsed story. We'll need to see their room, Holloway said. Already rented out, Gillis replied too quickly. Cleaned top to bottom, nothing to see. A search warrant obtained the next day revealed room 8 had indeed been cleaned with industrial-grade cleaning products. The level of sanitation was far beyond standard motel housekeeping. Luminol testing showed blood traces despite the cleaning, microscopic spatter on the ceiling and behind the headboard that told a story of violence. Cell phone records placed the Chen's phones at the motel for only 3 hours before they went offline permanently. Their car had been moved after that point. Security footage from a gas station 2 miles away showed the vehicle being parked by a figure whose face remained hidden from cameras. The driver walked back toward the motel in the darkness. As the investigation intensified, Holloway ordered a complete background check on Vernon Gillis. The results were perplexing. Gillis had owned the Desert Pines Motel for 7 years, with no prior history in hospitality. Before that, his backstory was suspiciously sparse. A few addresses in Nevada and New Mexico, employment records with gaps, and a curious lack of digital footprint for a man in his 50s. It's like he barely existed before buying this place, Deputy Rodriguez noted as they reviewed the file. Further digging revealed Gillis had purchased the motel in cash from the previous owner, an elderly woman eager to retire. The sale had bypassed real estate agents and involved minimal paperwork. Even more unsettling was the discovery that Gillis lived full-time in a converted storage room behind the motel office, despite owning a house in town that sat perpetually empty. As the investigation expanded, Holloway's team connected with law enforcement agencies in neighboring states. A disturbing pattern emerged. 3 unsolved disappearances over the past 6 years, all involving travelers along the same highway corridor, all last seen near the Desert Pines Motel. Each case had been investigated separately, with different jurisdictions unaware of the others. 7 days into the investigation, with surveillance established on the motel, Holloway received a call from the FBI field office in Phoenix. They had managed to trace Vernon Gillis's identity further back and made a chilling discovery. Vernon Gillis wasn't his real name. It belonged to a Michigan man who had died in 1994. Whoever was running the Desert Pines Motel had been living under a stolen identity for decades. That night, as Holloway was reviewing case files in his office, dispatch radioed with an urgent update. A California family of 4 had just checked into the Desert Pines Motel. Despite the surveillance team's presence, Holloway immediately ordered patrol cars to the scene. "Get them out of there now," he instructed. "Do not let them stay in that room." Deputies arrived to find the family, parents, and 2 teenage children, already settled in room 5. Gillis had been unusually accommodating, they reported, offering a special rate for the large corner room and bringing extra towels personally. As the confused family was escorted from the property under the pretense of a gas leak, forensic teams executed a more comprehensive search warrant. This time, they focused on areas beyond the motel rooms themselves, the office, storage spaces, and Gillis's living quarters. In the cramped room where Gillis lived, investigators found a hidden panel in the floor. Beneath it was a crawl space leading to a network of narrow tunnels connecting to each motel room. The tunnels allowed someone to move underneath the building undetected, accessing trapdoors that opened into the motel room closets. He could enter any room without using the door, Holloway realized with growing horror. Guests would never know someone was coming in. The investigation took an even darker turn when cadaver dogs alerted at several locations on the property. Behind the motel, in a maintenance shed filled with gardening equipment, officers discovered a hidden room containing plastic sheets, restraints, and a collection of personal items: watches, jewelry, wallets, and driver's licenses from at least 11 different individuals dating back 6 years. Most disturbing was the discovery of a journal meticulously documenting each victim, their routines, conversations overheard through the walls, and detailed notes on their belongings. The entries revealed Gillis's methodology. He targeted specific guests who met his criteria, those traveling through, not expected elsewhere immediately, who wouldn't be missed for days. He monitored them through the walls, learning their patterns before entering their rooms through the hidden access points while they slept. The journal's clinical tone was perhaps its most chilling aspect. Gillis described his actions without emotion, as if documenting scientific observations. He noted which rooms were best suited for quiet work, and which guests were light sleepers requiring special handling. By this point, Vernon Gillis, or whoever he really was, had vanished. The surveillance team had lost sight of him during a shift change the previous evening. A nationwide alert was issued, but Holloway suspected the man had extensive experience in disappearing and creating new identities. 3 days later, a state trooper in New Mexico spotted Gillis at a truck stop near the Arizona border. When approached, Gillis took his own life with a concealed handgun before he could be apprehended. He left no note, no explanation, no closure for the families of those who had disappeared. The investigation that followed would eventually link Gillis, whose real identity was never conclusively established, to 17 disappearances across 4 states over a 9-year period. Ground-penetrating radar and extensive excavation around the Desert Pines Motel ultimately revealed human remains buried at various locations on the property, including beneath the concrete floor of the maintenance shed. Forensic examination of the motel's structure showed the tunnel system had been added gradually over the years since Gillis had purchased the property, suggesting a long-term, methodical approach to creating his killing ground. The motel's remote location, the transient nature of its clientele, and Gillis's careful selection of victims had allowed his activities to continue undetected for years. For Sheriff Holloway, the case fundamentally changed how he viewed the seemingly mundane aspects of his county. The nondescript motel he had driven past hundreds of times without a second thought had concealed horrors beyond imagination. The ordinary man who nodded politely at county meetings and paid his taxes on time had been a predator of extraordinary calculation and patience. The truly frightening thing, Holloway later told a criminal psychology class at the State University, wasn't just what he did. It was how long he did it without anyone connecting the dots. People disappeared, investigations were conducted, but the cases were separated by time and jurisdiction. No one saw the pattern until we started specifically looking for it. In the years following the case, Holloway worked with federal agencies to develop a cross-jurisdictional alert system for disappearances along highway corridors, specifically designed to identify patterns that might otherwise be missed when cases are investigated in isolation. The Desert Pines Motel was demolished in 2021. The land remains vacant, a gravel lot beside the highway where truckers occasionally park for overnight rest. Few of them know the history of the site, but local residents still avoid the area, especially after dark. Holloway, now retired, keeps a map in his home office with pins marking the locations of similar roadside motels across the American Southwest. He's identified 27 establishments with characteristics similar to the desert pines: remote locations, long-term owners who live on site, infrequent staff turnover, and buildings old enough to have been significantly modified over the years. There's a reason we never found all the people in Gillis's journal, Holloway told the FBI agent who worked the case with him. I don't think the Desert Pines was his first operation. Someone that organized, that patient. He learned those skills somewhere else first. 3 of the motels on Holloway's map have changed ownership in the past year. New proprietors, all with verified backgrounds and legitimate identification. But Holloway keeps watching, checking records, following up on missing persons reports along those same highways. Because the most terrifying lesson from the Desert Pines case wasn't that a monster had operated in his jurisdiction. It was the realization that such monsters can blend seamlessly into the background of American life, running businesses, paying taxes, nodding hello to law enforcement officers, while concealing unspeakable secrets behind ordinary walls. Highway motels are perfect hunting grounds, Gillis had written in the final pages of his journal. People check in, giving you their names, vehicle information, credit cards. They carry their valuables. They sleep deeply after long drives. And if they don't check out, well, most people assume they just continued their journey. The highway both delivers them to you and erases your tracks. Somewhere, Holloway believes, another motel owner is making those same calculations, creating hidden spaces between walls and watching as travelers pull in for the night, unaware of what waits after they close their eyes. Sheriff Mark Callahan had spent his entire adult life in Iron County, a remote stretch of northern Michigan where dense forests gave way to rocky shorelines along Lake Superior. The county's 1,200 square miles housed just over 10,000 residents, most clustered in small towns surrounded by wilderness. At 49, Callahan knew every back road and most of the locals by name, which made the events of summer 2015 all the more disturbing. The first disappearance barely registered as suspicious. Kyle Brennan, a seasoned backpacker from Chicago, was reported overdue from a solo hiking trip in late May. Search and rescue operations found his campsite intact, tent still pitched, food properly stored in bear-resistant containers, no signs of wildlife disturbance. But Brennan himself had vanished without apparent explanation. Given the vast wilderness and the man's solitary trek, most assumed he had become lost or suffered an accident in a remote area beyond the search perimeter. 3 weeks later, it happened again. Lisa Chen, a wildlife photographer from Minneapolis, disappeared from her campsite in a different section of the county forest. Like Brennan, she was an experienced outdoors person, and like his case, her camp showed no signs of disturbance or struggle, just an empty tent with her equipment neatly arranged inside. Her rental car remained parked at the trailhead, untouched. By the third disappearance in mid-July, Sean Fletcher, a local fishing guide who knew the area intimately, Callahan recognized they were facing something far more sinister than wilderness accidents. In 27 years of law enforcement in Iron County, he had never seen a pattern like this. The FBI was called in, bringing specialized wilderness search teams and behavioral analysts to assist the investigation. We're looking for someone who knows these woods as well as the locals do, the lead FBI analyst told Callahan during their initial briefing. Maybe better, someone comfortable operating in remote terrain who can move without leaving obvious signs. The profile they developed was unsettling, likely a male with military or advanced outdoor training, physically fit, patient, methodical. Someone who might appear completely ordinary in daily life, while harboring extreme antisocial tendencies. Most concerning was the analysis suggesting the perpetrator was probably local, or at least someone who spent significant time in the area, given the intimate knowledge of the terrain required to operate undetected. For Callahan, this was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case. The idea that someone from his community, someone he likely knew, had spoken with, perhaps even trusted, could be responsible for these disappearances, challenged his fundamental understanding of the place he had sworn to protect. The investigation intensified through August, with forest patrols, trail cameras deployed throughout the wilderness areas, and coordinated searches that found nothing. No bodies, no significant evidence, no witnesses. The only pattern emerging was the precise lack of evidence at each scene, suggesting remarkable care and planning. Then came the first break in the case. A hiker reported finding unusual items arranged in what appeared to be a small shelter deep in the forest, nearly 15 miles from the nearest road, a space created beneath fallen trees, camouflaged with local vegetation, containing what looked like personal effects from multiple individuals. By the time authorities reached the location, the shelter had been dismantled, items removed, the entire area meticulously cleared of evidence. Only trampled vegetation confirmed the hiker's account. "He's watching us," Callahan told his deputies. "He knew we were coming." The second break came from an unexpected source: historical records. FBI researchers looking for similar cases discovered that between 1989 and 1994, 4 hikers had disappeared in the same general region under similar circumstances. Those cases, investigated separately over years by different personnel, had never been connected. All 4 remained unsolved, classified as probable wilderness accidents. Callahan began reviewing county records from that period, looking for any patterns or connections. What he found sent a chill through the investigation team. Each of the earlier disappearances had occurred during the same 2-week period, when the Iron County Wilderness Center conducted its annual forest guide training program, which attracted outdoor enthusiasts from across the Midwest. The program had been run for nearly 30 years by Martin Blackwood, a respected local outdoorsman who had trained hundreds of wilderness guides, including many who served on the county's search and rescue teams. Blackwood, now in his 60s, had retired from active training 5 years earlier, but still consulted for the Wilderness Center and occasionally led specialized survival courses. Callahan had known Blackwood for decades. Their children had attended the same schools. They had served together on community committees. Blackwood had even assisted in previous search and rescue operations, his expertise in tracking and wilderness navigation proving invaluable. The sheriff found himself facing the most difficult decision of his career: whether to investigate a respected community member based on a circumstantial connection. The FBI team encouraged caution, recommending surveillance rather than confrontation while they gathered more evidence. What followed was a careful operation to monitor Blackwood without alerting him. Agents discovered he maintained a second property, a remote cabin accessible only by a logging road and then a 2-mile hike, that didn't appear in his official records. Surveillance was established, but the cabin's isolated location and Blackwood's irregular visits made consistent monitoring nearly impossible. The case might have stalled there, if not for the 4th disappearance that August. Maria Delgado, a university student conducting forest ecology research. Unlike the previous victims, Delgado had been deploying motion-activated wildlife cameras throughout her research area for months. When she vanished, leaving behind an undisturbed camp similar to the others, investigators recovered her equipment, including memory cards from cameras placed deep in the forest. Most showed nothing unusual, deer, foxes, the occasional bear. But one camera, positioned on a game trail far from marked hiking paths, had captured something extraordinary. A man moving through the forest, carrying what appeared to be surveying equipment. The image quality was poor, the figure partially obscured by foliage, but something about the man's posture and movements struck Callahan immediately. "That's Martin," he said quietly when shown the image. "I'd recognize that walk anywhere." Further analysis of Delgado's research notes revealed something the ecology student had apparently noticed herself. Several of her cameras had been repositioned or disabled over the months of her project. She had attributed this to wildlife or weather, but the pattern of camera disruptions created a rough boundary around an area of approximately 5 square miles, an area that investigators now realized included Blackwood's secret cabin. The operation to approach the cabin was planned with military precision. Given the suspect's wilderness expertise and the remote location, authorities could not risk a standard approach. FBI tactical teams were airlifted to locations surrounding the target area before converging through the dense forest. What they found at the cabin defied the worst expectations of even veteran investigators. Hidden beneath a false floor in a storage shed were items belonging to all 7 missing persons from the recent disappearances, carefully organized and labeled. More disturbing were similar collections dating back decades: driver's licenses, watches, cameras, journals, each meticulously cataloged with dates and locations. The collection suggested not 7 victims, but potentially dozens, spanning nearly 30 years. Blackwood himself was not at the cabin when authorities arrived. A journal found inside indicated he was conducting what he called a long-term wilderness immersion experiment, deep within the national forest to the north. It would take another 3 days of intensive searching before tactical teams located him at a primitive camp nearly 20 miles from the nearest road. When confronted, Blackwood showed neither surprise nor resistance. "I wondered when you'd make the connection, Mark," he said to Callahan as he was taken into custody. "Took you longer than I expected." The questioning that followed revealed a methodical predator who viewed his actions through a distorted philosophical lens. Blackwood described feeling disappointed by outdoor enthusiasts who claimed wilderness expertise while remaining fundamentally unaware of their surroundings. His crimes, he explained with unsettling calm, began as tests of others' awareness and survival skills, tests they invariably failed. "They never saw me coming," he told investigators. "People claiming to be experienced outdoorsmen, and they couldn't detect someone tracking them for days. They didn't deserve the wilderness." Most chilling was Blackwood's description of how he selected and stalked his victims, sometimes for days before making any move. He would study their habits, observe their awareness levels, and evaluate their woodcraft. Those he deemed unworthy of the wilderness became targets. His military background, including specialized training in tracking and survival, combined with decades of intimate knowledge of the local terrain, had made him nearly invisible in his chosen hunting grounds. The psychological evaluation diagnosed Blackwood with a severe personality disorder characterized by grandiosity, lack of empathy, and an obsessive worldview in which he appointed himself judge over others' worthiness to exist in his wilderness. His methodical approach and ability to compartmentalize allowed him to maintain a respected public persona while carrying out his crimes. As the investigation expanded, authorities made a gruesome discovery. Using detailed notes from Blackwood's journals, search teams located what he called his research sites, remote locations where he had left his victims' remains, deliberately positioned to accelerate natural decomposition and animal scavenging. The careful placement had ensured that even when occasional bones were discovered years later, They were assumed to be from lost hikers who had died of natural causes or accidents. For Sheriff Callahan, the case represented a fundamental breach of trust, not just in Blackwood, but in his own judgment. The man he had known for decades, had respected and worked alongside, had been hunting human beings in the forests of Iron County throughout their acquaintance. The hardest part to accept, Callahan later told a journalist documenting the case, wasn't just that evil existed in our community. It's that it wore such a convincing mask of normalcy. Martin wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was standing in plain sight, serving on committees, teaching wilderness skills to our children, helping in search efforts for the very people he had taken. In the aftermath, Callahan established new protocols for wilderness law enforcement across the region, including improved coordination between jurisdictions for missing persons cases in remote areas. The Iron County Wilderness Center, though not implicated in any wrongdoing, underwent complete reorganization with enhanced background checks and oversight for all instructors. Blackwood was convicted on multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life without possibility of parole. He maintains an eerie calm in prison, reportedly telling his court-appointed psychiatrist that he considers the facility just another type of wilderness with its own rules of survival. Sheriff Callahan still serves Iron County, but something fundamental changed in his approach to policing. The wilderness that once represented freedom and natural beauty now contains shadows he cannot ignore. On his office wall hangs a topographical map of the county, with small red pins marking the locations where Blackwood's victims were found. A constant reminder that the most dangerous predators are often those we never suspect, hiding not in the darkness of the forest, but behind the familiar faces of our neighbors, colleagues, and friends. The forests of Iron County remain popular with hikers, campers, and outdoor enthusiasts, but local guides now include a standard warning in their safety briefings. Always inform others of your exact route and expected return. Never hike alone. And remember that in the wilderness, awareness isn't just about wildlife and weather. Sometimes, the most dangerous element in nature is human. Sheriff Andrea Carson had worked 14 years in Lakeland County before the Meredith Richardson case changed everything. At 41, Carson had handled her share of serious crimes in the rural Washington community, nestled between dense forests and the sprawling edge of Lake Crescent. But nothing in her career had prepared her for what began with a routine call on a rainy Tuesday morning in October 2018. The call came from Roy Simmons, a retired logger who lived in a cabin on the less developed north shore of the lake. He had spotted something unusual while fishing at dawn, what appeared to be clothing caught on a submerged tree branch about 30 feet from shore. When he maneuvered his boat closer, he realized with horror that he was looking at a sleeve with an arm still in it. By the time Carson arrived with her deputies, Simmons had marked the location with a buoy. The county dive team recovered the remains of a young woman, later identified as Meredith Richardson, 26, a graduate student from Seattle, who had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier while collecting water samples for an environmental research project. What immediately struck Carson was the condition of the body. Despite being submerged for weeks, Richardson's remains showed preservation inconsistent with typical lake decomposition. The medical examiner would later confirm Carson's suspicion. The body had been kept somewhere cold before being placed in the lake, perhaps only days before discovery. More disturbing were the restraint marks on Richardson's wrists and ankles, indicating she had been held captive before her death. The cause of death was drowning, but not in the lake. Her lungs contained water with chemical properties different from Lake Crescent. She had been drowned elsewhere, then transported to the lake for disposal. Someone kept her alive for a while, the medical examiner told Carson privately. The tissue damage suggests she was restrained for at least 2 weeks before she died. The investigation revealed Richardson had been staying at the Lakeside Inn, a small hotel on the southern shore. She had been seen leaving early one morning in a rental car packed with sampling equipment, heading toward the more remote northern parts of the lake. Her car was eventually found at a trailhead parking area, locked and undisturbed. Her research samples, notebooks, and equipment were missing. As Carson pieced together Richardson's movements, she noticed something troubling about the location where the body was found. It was only accessible by boat or by navigating a difficult woodland trail. Whoever had placed Richardson's body there knew the lake well, understood its depths and currents, and had chosen a spot where discovery was unlikely except by chance. 2 months into the investigation, with few leads developing, a second body was discovered, this time by kayakers exploring a remote cove on the western edge of the lake. The victim, identified as Travis Webb, 31, had been missing for 7 months. Like Richardson, he had been restrained before death, drowned in water not from the lake, and placed in a location suggesting intimate knowledge of the lake's geography. Webb's connection to the area was less obvious than Richardson's. A freelance photographer from Portland, he had apparently visited Lake Crescent to shoot landscapes for a regional travel magazine. His last known movements placed him at various scenic points around the lake, taking photographs alone. The similarities between the cases were impossible to ignore. Both victims had legitimate reasons to be in remote areas around the lake. Both worked in solitary professions that wouldn't immediately raise alarms if they weren't in daily contact with others, and both had been kept alive for a period before being drowned. Carson established a task force, bringing in state investigators and FBI analysts. The profile that emerged was disturbing. They were likely dealing with a predator who lived or worked near the lake, someone with a boat and the ability to move around the shoreline without attracting attention. Someone who knew the lake's hidden places and could maintain a secure location to hold victims. The search for this location became the investigation's focus. Lake Crescent was surrounded by over 100 square miles of densely forested land, scattered with hunting cabins, vacation homes, and isolated properties. Many were accessible only by private roads or boat, making a systematic search challenging. At the task force's recommendation, Carson began methodically reviewing property records around the lake, looking for anything unusual: recent purchases, owners with criminal histories, properties with unique features like outbuildings or particularly isolated locations. One property caught her attention: a 3-acre parcel on the northwestern shore with a small cabin and a large outbuilding originally constructed as a boathouse. The property had changed hands 18 months earlier, purchased by Western Horizon LLC, a company registered in Delaware with minimal public information. Further investigation revealed the company was owned by Philip Kendrick, 53, who had moved to the area from Idaho. A background check on Kendrick showed no criminal record, but several concerning gaps in his history, periods where he seemed to disappear from public records before resurfacing in new locations. His employment history included work as a water treatment specialist for several municipal systems, and more recently, as a self-employed environmental consultant. Rather than approaching Kendrick directly, Carson organized surveillance on his property. For 2 weeks, deputies monitored his movements from concealed positions in the surrounding forest and from unmarked boats on the lake. His pattern seemed ordinary: regular trips to town for supplies, occasional boat outings that appeared to be fishing expeditions, nothing overtly suspicious. Then came the detail that changed everything. Deputy Williams, observing through a high-powered scope, reported seeing Kendrick carrying what appeared to be scientific equipment from his boat to the boathouse, equipment similar to what would be used for water testing and sample collection. Carson requested an expanded search of Richardson's and Webb's backgrounds, focusing on any potential connection to water quality research or environmental testing. The results were chilling. Both victims had been involved in water testing projects. Richardson directly through her graduate research, Webb more tangentially through photographs commissioned for an environmental impact report on lake watersheds. "He's targeting people collecting water samples," Carson told the task force. "People who might test in specific areas of the lake." The question was why? What was in the lake that Kendrick didn't want found? The answer emerged from Richardson's academic supervisor at the university. Her research had focused on detecting trace amounts of specific chemicals used in certain industrial processes, chemicals that, if found, might indicate illegal dumping. Her sampling plan had concentrated on the northwestern section of the lake, closest to Kendrick's property. With this information and the surveillance observations, Carson secured a search warrant for Kendrick's property. The tactical approach was planned carefully, with teams approaching by both land and water at dawn, when Kendrick was observed to be sleeping in the main cabin. What they found in the boathouse confirmed their worst fears. The building had been converted into a sophisticated laboratory on one side and a detention area on the other. The lab contained equipment for water testing and chemical analysis, along with records of systematic monitoring across Lake Crescent. The detention area featured a sealed room with restraint points matching the marks found on the victims. Most disturbing was a large tank filled with water containing chemical additives, water that would later match what was found in the victim's lungs. Nearby, a computer contained detailed files on both Richardson and Webb, along with 3 other individuals who had conducted environmental research at the lake over the previous 2 years. Kendrick was arrested without incident, appearing almost relieved when deputies entered his cabin. During initial questioning, he maintained his innocence, claiming the lab was for his consulting work and the restraint room was for personal use. This facade crumbled when confronted with evidence from his computer and the chemical match to the drowning medium. The investigation that followed uncovered a disturbing history. Kendrick had worked for a chemical manufacturing company that had secretly used the remote lake area for illegal waste disposal in the 1990s. As an employee aware of the dumping, he had received substantial payments to maintain silence when the company was later sold. His subsequent move to Lake Crescent was no coincidence. He had been monitoring the water for evidence of the chemicals, which could still trigger an environmental investigation despite the passage of time. Anyone conducting systematic water testing in specific areas of the lake represented a threat to the secret he was paid to protect. Richardson's research focus had made her particularly dangerous, as her sampling protocols would have inevitably detected the chemical signature Kendrick was hiding. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he told Carson during a formal interview after his arrest. But they wouldn't stop. They kept coming back to the same areas, taking sample after sample. "There are things in that water that need to stay hidden." Further investigation revealed evidence linking Kendrick to 2 additional disappearances in Idaho several years earlier, both environmental researchers working on watershed projects. Their remains were eventually recovered from a remote lake near Kendrick's previous residence, using information from his detailed records. For Sheriff Carson, the case revealed how ordinary-seeming people could harbor extraordinary capacity for calculation and violence. Kendrick had maintained a pleasant, forgettable presence in the community, nodding hello at the local store, occasionally attending town meetings about lake conservation, even once offering Carson fishing advice when they happened to launch their boats at the same time. "What haunts me isn't just what he did," Carson later told a criminal psychology class studying the case. "It's how easily he blended in. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was standing in plain sight, engaged in the community, talking about the very lake he was using as a dumping ground for his victims." Kendrick eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder and kidnapping to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life without possibility of parole. He never revealed the full extent of the chemical dumping that had motivated his crimes, maintaining that exposing that information would cause greater harm than what I did. Environmental testing of Lake Crescent continued under tight security protocols. Eventually, investigators identified several underwater sites containing sealed drums of industrial waste, a legacy of corporate environmental crimes decades earlier. The cleanup operation remains ongoing, with costs estimated in the tens of millions. Carson still serves as sheriff of Lakeland County. She no longer goes fishing on Lake Crescent, despite having enjoyed the activity for years before the case. The knowledge of what had happened beneath those pristine waters, both the dumping and the disposal of victims, fundamentally changed her relationship with the place she had loved since childhood. "Water keeps secrets," she told a reporter documenting the case. "It's why Kendrick chose it, both for hiding the chemicals and for disposing of his victims. Water dissolves, disperses, conceals, but eventually it gives up what you've tried to hide. That's the lesson here. Buried secrets don't stay buried forever." The case prompted changes in how environmental researchers conduct fieldwork in remote areas, with new protocols requiring regular check-ins and GPS tracking. Universities now recommend that students and researchers working on potentially sensitive environmental testing travel in pairs and inform local law enforcement of their sampling locations. Lake Crescent remains a popular destination for tourists and outdoor enthusiasts, most unaware of its darker history. On quiet mornings, fishing boats still drift over the deep waters, their occupants rarely considering what might once have been hidden in the depths below, or what secrets might still remain, waiting to surface when the conditions are right.